Fact is, the stats is cooked like the books. We more than pimps, prostitutes, dealers, and crooks. Take a look, same faces on the temple walls. They gave you math sciences to build pyramids. Today they building more so you can perpetrate like you ball, buying out bars, foreign cars, Audemars, frontin' like a star. But you are by birth, and that's the God's honest. No ass, just stardust, and the words of promise that you make when you come through like the comets. To live a good natural life in correspondence with the laws of the mother. Love your sister and your brother. Watch them close, but have love for the other. The friend of me turn enemies. Man, we suffer when we keep perpetuating the lies. You discover the truth. Yeah. Shout out to all my truth speakers and truth seekers.
We kind of dealing with what's about to take place. So being that they're going to they're about to select the person that they already elected. They're going to go through the ceremonial, purely ceremonial, impotent gesture of getting people to cast a ballot. The word cast means to entrap, but it could also mean to throw away, like when you cast your pearls of swine. So when you're dealing with stuff like that, you're dealing with the fact that we're in a precarious position, while at the same time opening up a new space for everything to kind of be perceived as what it exactly is. You know what I mean? Because everything that is based on a historical aspect that we have not taken full advantage of, due to the fact that lack of a nationality has created a predatory nature when it comes to the cultural appropriation of so-called black people who perceive themselves as black. So what that does is that creates now a standard causality. So the causality of this whole thing is based on what people have perceived to be slavery, right? Because everything is somewhat juxtaposition between what was done, what is being done, and what possibly can be done. But everybody that's suggesting something to do is suggesting it based upon what their agenda to prolong that is, based upon their perception of what they think they are. So then everything then is based upon people's own individual identities contributing to what it is they pay into to collectively represent themselves. So when you talk about people who call themselves Italian, they are collectively represented as the Italian community. When you're talking about people who perceive themselves as Jewish, they are collectively perceived as the Jewish community. When you say the so-called black community now, right? The first thing that all these other people in communities that I've mentioned come to mind is what has been marketed to them, what a black community is. But what a black community is aberration, a creature of law created to marginalize and sectionalize a certain people based upon an economic and physio-geographical position. So what that does is that collectively the people within that marginalization have to somehow dive through all of what everybody else thinks they are, right? Then they gotta settle on what they think they are, right? But it's still not based upon something that they themselves have actively gone out to pursue. They have pursued this as a reaction, right? As a backlash to what they know that they are consciously perceived as. So you could have, like I said, you could have a BA from Harvard, you could be a billionaire over all that. If one day you go in Fendi and there happen to be a racist person in that store, they're going to tell you and remind you that no matter how much money you got, they've created a perpetual system, right, to continuously force you to have to prove what you are. So what they could walk to, we got to fly to. You understand what I'm saying? So because these people have assumed the institutional trust that we call the United States of America, right? What we're talking about when we talk about that now is the marginalization of all of this based upon the caste system of what people perceive as white supremacy. The word Caucasian is not even a word that comes from English. That's actually an Algonquin word that comes from the word Koka'asu. which means elder and wise one, and one who was put before to lead. So these people, when we look back on the ethnographic information based upon all of the useless eugenics-based history, false identity history that was given to all of the people who were colonized by the people who would be perceived as white today, and they have gone through a generational disconnect of what they used to be prior to 1492 and what we are based on what happened in 1492. But all we know about 1492 is Columbus came, and it was a lot of murder and death. So because they've created a way where they can gloss over huge tracts of history, right, to get to the part where it's always about you. It's always about you being a slave. It's always about you never having enough. It's always about you pulling yourself out of your bootstraps. It's all about you being in jail. It's all about you being a criminal. It's all about you not being able to be there for your children. But then when we do the statistical analysis on that, about how black men don't raise their children, it's actually the opposite. When you check the Cornell University study, it said that 64% of black men are actually there, and out of all the racial groups, they're the most consistently on deck with their children. All of that. So what happens is it creates a situation where you are now in a position where you have to choose between a woman who comes from a dynasty, who erected a dynasty of school to prison pipeline, of labeling black males as super predators, allowing her own constituency based on her negligence to be killed, slaughtered in places that they set wars up to go get money and oil and marginalize other people, to now to the point where as soon as you hear the term Arab, you think terrorists. Who did that? I didn't create that. Like, some people, when they identify with something, they assume what that thing is. But you could assume something all day, but it doesn't mean that that's what you are. So just because you are born on the land on the United States doesn't make you an American. What makes you an American is being foreign to the United States. Look at that. According to the law, because the United States, under the Trading with the Enemy Act, right, was put under a perpetual emergency management situation where every president that comes in has to re-sign it into law. So they've already made the United States a battleground. They've already taken the journalistic society, CNN, Fox, and them. They already took the FTC and these people to court to get the right to promote false stories under what they call yellow journalism, which is why when we talk about Sandy Hook, nobody goes to jail for that, because they came out later that never happened, that it was all fake. There's actually pictures of Steven Spielberg directing the people at the Boston so-called bombing, explosion, and marathon stuff. So what I'm saying is that being that we're all in this theater that created the grand theater for you to now participate in, that is going to be you voting for your own destruction. It's going to be you basically being tallied up to choose between devil number one, devil number two. So the solution, but here go the funny thing. There's actually 5 different people running for president right now. How come you only hear about 2? There's people right now. There's people who once the president actually gets elected, of the United States gets elected, there's a disconnect between the time he's elected and the inauguration. There's a month. It's 30 days. You know why? Because in that 30-day period, someone from the Republic is supposed to step up and send them notice that the Republic aspect of the government has reestablished itself, right? And now their subordinate United States, privately, now their subordinate public United States now has to fall in the jurisdiction of whatever the constitutional 1787 Republic deems necessary. But a republic, right, is a representative form of government, which is just because you don't want to have one person that represents this group and then have that person be the only one to dominate everybody. You want to have everybody to have a representative. But that representative has to be accountable for the person who's representing the group. But these people are all a part of organizations called ALEC or ISDS, which are all of these fake white male, right, Knights of Columbus, Knights of Pythias, pseudo Prince Hall, right? Sorry, black people, Prince Hall, all of these little Jack and Jill, all of these people pay into this little fund where all of these white men can go to hotels and make legislation outside of the people's view, and then bring the private legislation based on them being paid privately to come into the public venue and make that a law to repress and shoot you and kill you. Is that right? No, because there was a lot of things like fraternal organizations and the corporatization and the weaponization of knowledge to be used by people to set themselves up in these shrinedoms that allowed them to now govern over the people, like you see Daddy Rich in Car Wash, or you see these so-called Boule influenced people who act like they're here for the preservation and the upward movement of black people, when they're really just about their continuous domestication and subjugation based upon them not wanting to stand in the place that they have sworn a secret to protect. The secret being that we will always hear that our ancestors are the Almanacanos Estados, the free Moorish estates, that we are, and everybody else in the world know about the Al-Maghreb Al-Aqsa, the Morocco of the farthest west. We know that we're in an empire. We know that we have a prophet. But what we see as ecclesiastical, which are divine creeds, tenets, customs, right? Customary laws passed down from generation to generation like we supposed to have, right?
Have been reduced.
Black people have taken that and misconstrued that as a religion because that's what their white master has told them it is. So because he say that that's Egyptology is a pseudoscience or pseudo-religion, there are certain black people who go to his school who will believe that, which will forever keep them away from the essence of what's in them. Meanwhile, the same Caucasian telling them that is going dressing up like that in rituals, right? Writing books and making movies where he's the god of Egypt. But what are you? You the butler. You the 12 years a slave. When he's dressing up like Argenton and Cleopatra and in Gladiator, the Spaniard. This is all about us. So what we're dealing with is the constant, perpetual, generational identity theft that continuously happens, and that a lot of our people openly participate. Watching the X-Men Apocalypse movie, and Apocalypse is there talking to Storm in Egypt, and she talking about how she got to follow the law and do all of this, and he look at her in his Moorish burnous, right? Blue black, look at her and said, why would you want to be a slave when you are a goddess, right? So I'm thinking that to myself when I look at people like, what are you doing in your community on the street to get people to be seen as something else other than a goddamn slave? You know what slaves do? Slaves march. Slaves walk around with slogans, throwing their hands in the air when you're supposed to be taking that hand and putting it in somebody's face. That's what you're supposed to be doing. But again,
or creating a document.
Or creating a document or an ecclesiastical government that allows you to function outside of their system. And all you got to have is a nationality to do it. Why you think you ain't never seen no Sikh in jail? Why you never think you don't see no Palestinian in jail? Why you in American jail? Why you don't think you'll never see no Chinese or no Indian person or no Hasidic person in jail? Only people you see in jail is who? Blacks, whites, Mexicans. That's it. Chinese got their own section of jail because they people don't go to jail. Because you know why? Because every one of them Chinese gangsters is an agent of the damn Chinese government, and the United States know, and they can't do shit about it. Because China done already said if you invade Syria past a certain parallel, we going to war, buddy. There's actual documentation. I grew up in Crown Heights. So nobody can tell me nothing about the Setmar community or the Lubavitch community because I live right between both of them. So I've seen them bang on each other. I've seen how they get down. That's some Crip and Blood shit with Jews. But you'll never know that. They control the media in their society, and that's what they supposed to do.
Absolutely.
People getting mad at these people for the oppression when really we're at the point now where the rubber done met the road. All the karma on us is done. This whole election right now is based on the war that's been going on. And the war that's going on is really between three companies. It's Genie Oil, right? It's Merck, and then it's this other joint they got called, what is this called? It's called, it's Merca, Genie Oil. Merca is Russian. Genie Oil is funded by the Friends for the People of Syria. You know who that is? That's Lord Rothschild, Cheney, Bush, and members of the Saudi Arabian, Turkey, Qatar, and Egyptian government. They are all the group of friends of the Syrian people. These are the people that's been trying to pump this pipeline since the first Gulf, since when they was calling that thing the Persian Gulf. Remember that? That's back in the late 80s, 90s. That's when it's Persian Gulf. Before that, then it became the Middle East. The group of friends of Syria, they've been trying to create this pipeline that the connecting point has to go through Syria and Iran. That's the linchpin. That's why it's so necessary for Iran to be under sanctions and all this and that. They done released the sanctions to Iran. They done all of this. While this is happening now, Zimbabwe is now about to make the UN its own national currency, which now formally cements China in Africa, which is basically going to be the beachhead for these people now, the Chinese now, to when the white men go, they become the new one that we got to deal with. But the difference with them is they actually about forgiving debt. They forgive the debt, and they actually pay for the infrastructure. All they want is their own little community where they allowed to be Afro-Chinese or whatever that is. But in that, that's how it goes.
People should understand that they're not voting for the president of the United States. People are voting for the administrative president of the office of the presidency of the United States of America.
Wait, pull up and come again. Say that one more time, my brother.
People need to understand that they're not voting for the United States president or the president of the United States. They're voting for the administrative, whoever's going to be the head of the administrative office of the presidency of the United States of America. So what we're talking about then is a pageantry. We're talking about something that is based on a so-called democracy. Now, what a democracy is supposed to be is people believe a democracy is everybody voting for something. That's one way to understand it. Another way to understand it is that a democracy is a demonstrative form of government. So you have to demonstrate in order to allow the government to move or do anything for you. So demo also means to bring down, to destroy, like demolish, demole, right? So it also means to do something that's not real, because a demonstration is different than an actual action, right? If I demonstrate myself walking, it's different than if I'm walking. You know what I'm saying? So based on that, we have a situation where we're dealing with a colorable presidency. We have to deal with the fact that back under Bill Clinton, the Congress was taken to court where they said that they were going to turn the United States into a battleground. They needed to get a congressional mandate to allow them to turn the United States corporation and all of its holdings into a battleground situation. So once that was done, they were now able to create what was called the theater. Now the theater of war is the worldwide clandestine services working together to create games of espionage to justify governmental acts of violence that they call wars. You know what I'm saying? So the goal of all governments is to reduce and control their population. So that means as soon as a government comes into existence, that government's goal, according to the modern perception of European, quote-unquote, Caucasian, white, male-dominated government, that government is used to control at all costs. So it's somewhat totalitarian. So in a totalitarian system, in order for it not to collapse by the people uprising, you have to create segments within the populace, you know what I'm saying, that are doing better than other people in the populace. So that way there's always a, well, it can't all be bad if Oprah's a billionaire, you see what I'm saying? But Oprah only represents 1% of billionaires. Just like called white people, they say white or understand themselves as white based on the status and the color scheme in the system, represents 64% of the population, but only 31% of that 64% is actually phenotypically Caucasian. So who are the rest of these white people? Right? So it's the same thing when you're getting into things with government. Now, when you're talking about voting for a president of the United States, that's different. You haven't voted for a president of the United States since FDR. Actually, you really haven't had a president since Washington. Really, he was like really the really only one. Well, let's be generous. I would say Washington because he was the only one vested by somewhat the authority of our governor, right? But if we go beyond him, maybe you could maybe say Lincoln. You could maybe say Lincoln, but everything he did was under war amendments. So all of that stuff was illegal once peacetime came. That's why ever since the Civil War, every president that comes in has to sign in the Emergency Powers Act, whether there's an emergency or not. Because the only way that they can conform and keep everybody at a perpetual state of conflict is to scare them. So the only thing that you scare humans with is war. So therefore, if you vote, right, what you're doing is that in this system, what you're doing is you're voting. Okay, there's something called the Electoral College. Your votes are given to the Electoral College because in the democracy, you have chosen a representative form of government, right? Which is supposed to be impartial. So what happens now is each state has a certain members who represent the Electoral College. So then all of the votes that are taken are given to those people, and then those people tally that up and say who's president. Yep. So really, the average person who thinks that when they go to the ballot box that they're actually voting, right? They're exercising their constitutional right. The constitutional right only protects private citizens. Everybody since 1933 has been made public under the Trading with the Enemy Act. So that means all of the people are in a position now where they are taxable assets to be managed by the head trustee, whoever is the president of the United States. So based on that, the people elect who they want to be elected to then elect the president. So your vote don't count by itself. You don't count as an individual, especially if you have no standing in law. So now what they do, this is why they're able to just take a bunch of ballots and throw them in the ocean, or hack the computer and then fudge the numbers of the votes. That's what they created a situation to do. You know what I'm saying? To create a perpetual state of war, because they took the United States to court to make the United States a battleground. That's what you don't understand. So all of the war, all of the killings, all of the shootings, all of the false flag stuff, all of that is legally mandated. The reason why no cops are going to jail for killing these black men is because they're mandated to do that under the Trading with the Enemy Act. And the Trading with the Enemy Act was merged with the Constitution, which then became state law. So you could have a billion. I just watched a serial where they had a billionaire black family. These are black people have billions, right? And in order for them to sell their house, the real estate person told them that they needed to take the pictures of the black people, their family, off the wall. It would sell quicker. Think about what I just said. These people have $1 billion, and it doesn't matter because they're melanated. So what does that say? It says that this is an inherently racist, an inherently socialist, an inherently totalitarian regime from the beginning. And nobody wants to really take account of that. So in a society that has been dumbed down to the point where they have no actual intellectual GDP, of course they're going to elect somebody like Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump is the perfect businessman. He knows how to freak his tax forms. He knows how to pimp, because his grandfather made his money off of pimping and bootlegging. And he is the perfect fit. He was also blatantly racist in the 80s against the Central Park Five. That turned out that none of that actually happened, that the woman that said that these 5 young black men raped her, they did time in jail. Donald Trump came out, said that they need to be lynched, they need to be hung, burned. Go back and research it. He said all of this about black people. But because he in a Puffy video, it's all good. And this is what I mean. It's like the people have become complicit in their own destruction. They vote for their own oppression. So you can't do nothing for no people like that. Any so-called black man that vote for Clinton or Trump is an idiot, in my opinion. But that's my personal opinion. I'm not going to inflict that opinion and say that, well, if you vote and you believe in that something's wrong with you. I know what it is for me. But there's a lot of people that are invested in the society, and that's what they want. You understand that there are more melanated people invested in white supremacy than white people. Mm-hmm. Because there's more melanated people on the planet than white people. But when we say white, we're not talking about white. Like I said, if 64% of the population in America is white, but only 31% of that, right, is actually Caucasian. But then 65% of all law enforcement people are Caucasian, and then 95% of all of the people in politics that make the decisions are Caucasian, then what we're talking about is an institutional system to perpetually break the spirit and corrupt the moral soul of the Asiatic man and woman and child. Because the only way that they can prosper is when you don't. So you could say that it's racist, you say whatever you want, it doesn't matter. Because at the end, like I got some notes, like in the end, there's something right now. The Africans are now starting to wake up, smell the coffee. So now they're pulling out of something called the ICC. The ICC is the International Criminal Court, but the Africans call it the International Caucasian Court because the only international criminals that go to jail are African dictators who are paid by the Shell oil companies, the CIA, the clandestine services to destabilize their people under the guise of rebel, right, of controlling and trying to preserve the people's tradition when all these people got international accounts. How is it that you're an African warlord in the bush, but then you got offshore Switzerland accounts for billions of dollars while you in the bush cutting people's hands off and all of that? So people getting tired of that. So they coming out, they done pulled out the court. So what's going to happen is they have to set up their own court. But before they do that, they have to set up a sphere of influence. So what did the Africans do? They established the African Union. Then they also established the EAC. So you have elements within the clandestine services that's in the Egyptian Secret Service, that's in the Eritrean Secret Service, and in the Ethiopian Secret Services that's now trying to block this from happening. They doing like war games. They just put out a thing where Eritrea say that Egypt is trying to usurp their sovereignty. Why all of a sudden? Because people like Donald Trump, they know that when he come in, it's a wrap. But it's not going to be a wrap the way we think. Black people think that it's going to be open season on them like it ain't been like that for the past 239 years. No, what's going to happen is he's going to deal with the fact that both after the Civil War, what people don't understand is that the North and the South was brought into balance through the compact of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And what that did was it made everybody public citizens. So by the time they reorganized that shit in 1933, by merging that corporate constitution with the Trading with the Enemy Act, they now created a totalitarian system by which they could always reorganize it every 15 to 10 years. That's why every 10 to 25 years, black people call themselves something different. Because it's based upon what marketing team has come in. So now the new marketing team is being funded by George Soros. We'll call that Black Lives Matter. But that started as a hashtag, right? So how did the hashtag wind up funding over $250 million into a campaign that now they're trying to say is a terrorist organization? So right now, if I was somebody that was funding somebody like the Taliban, they would have the right to go into my accounts, right, and seize everything, right? So now that they're trying to say that the BLM is a terrorist organization and they know that they funded from George Soros, how come he's not going to jail? Well, because there's a lot of other stuff going on. Another thing that's happened recently, people are not talking about while they're keeping you in this election, is that China and Russia have formally declared war on the United States if they cross the 33rd parallel again. Meaning that the United States has created a perpetual system by them trying to create this Genie pipeline. First of all, the Genie pipeline mechanism was set up way back under the Bush situation. And the co-signatories on that is George Soros, Lord Rothschild, Dick Cheney, and one of the other devils. Anyway, they have a thing where this whole Middle East thing was about creating a pipeline that went from the Caspian Sea all the way over. And then the next part of that pipe thing was to create a rail system, a unified rail system that goes all the way from Russia all the way to Alaska. And then from Alaska all the way to America or whatever. So they're trying to unify this whole thing. But they can't do that with 85% of the population in destitute poverty. So what we got to do is understand that this election that they want to do or they want to create is really just another distraction. Because once this guy gets in, what he's going to do is reorganize the whole thing. He's going to formally annex the bankruptcy and then basically start to break away from the Vatican crown formally. But this is all going to be happening on the private side. On the public side, he's going to look like he's beefing up the police. But really, he's beefing up the police because he knows that at any time now, after this stuff goes through, anything can happen to him. Also, there's two of them. There's one Trump with the red tie with the blonde hair, and then there's one Trump with the red tie with the orange hair. So whichever one gets in, one is more of a neocon, one is more of a progressive conservative. So all of these terms are basic terms that came out of the Democratic Party to describe Republicans. Because the original Republicans, brothers and sisters, were Moors. So based on that, if you think you're voting Democrat, what you're voting for is the Democrat Party was created by Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Jefferson was an amalgamated mulatto who was a sadistic slave owner who used to do scientific and psychic trauma-based experiments on people like Sally Hemings and these people he had kids with. That's why you never met a white man named Jefferson yet. But in that, we want to close this one up, and we'll come back in part 2 after the election. I just wanted to put it out there and let everybody know that there's a lot more going on to this than you really may be doing acknowledge to. And if you're still looking at it from the perspective of your vote counts, the way they're marketing it counting to you, then you're lying to yourself, and they're lying to you. You have more power than you know when you know that you have the power to elect.